So I saw James Gunn's Superman, and I found it disappointing. I was hoping for a more classic Superman, strong, stoic, and focused on saving people and doing the right thing. That said, my expectations were lower than that, based on pre-release information, both through trailers and interviews, and through leaks online. While I was more positive about it walking out of the theater, I've had time in the day since to think about it, and talk about it with others, and I've really soured on the movie, and the more I think about it, the less I like this movie. This review does contain major spoilers for the movie, so be warned. Before I get into the problems, I do want to talk about the things I liked about the movie, because there was some stuff in here that I did really like despite the problems. First of all, Mr. Terrific and Nathan Fillion's Guy Gardner were easily the best part of the film. I really liked that Superman was hyper-focused on saving people whenever possible. To the point he's being questioned about potentially starting an international incident, his whole thing is that people were going to die and he had to stop it. There's a war being manufactured between two countries, and on one side, you see a bunch of villagers armed with farm equipment, and there's a kid who raises a flag to call for Superman. It's a bit of a cheap moment, but I can't help but like it. I also think David Cornsweet makes for a good Superman, despite the writing for Superman in this movie being not great. Much like Henry Cavill, he's wasted on the script, and I can only hope they course correct and build him into a better Superman than what we saw in this film. Now for the bad. This is going to be very unstructured, as this isn't an in-depth analysis. One of the first problems I have is in the fact that Superman just comes across as weak in this film. There's no true starting point or baseline Superman, so we can see what he's like at his peak. The film starts off with him already defeated for the first time, and he remains in a position of weakness for the rest of the movie. There's 4 fights he's in through the movie, and he never comes across as a force of nature, or the most powerful metahuman as described by the intro of the movie. As mentioned, the film starts with him defeated, he flees to the Fortress of Solitude to get healed, then goes back into the fray, but then he gets defeated again in a few short minutes. The next fight has him going up against the Axolotl Kaiju, which he struggles against, and the Justice Gang ends up showing up to defeat it for him. Granted, he does want to get it out of the city alive, whereas the Justice Gang just kill it. He then spends a big chunk of the movie imprisoned in a pocket dimension, and having kryptonite near him to take away his powers. When he gets his power back, he struggles to fight several goons for an extended sequence. Yes, he's in a weakened state due to the kryptonite, but that's the whole problem, is that we never see him at his peak. The final fight, he almost dies to the engineer, and is constantly getting his ass kicked by Ultraman. He does eventually win, but he also needs Krypto to help him win. I found this unsatisfying too, as he realized Lex was giving commands to Ultraman, and didn't change up his fighting style to confuse him, but instead used the dog to destroy the cameras, so Lex couldn't give commands anymore. Naturally, I'm not saying he should win every fight with ease, but the problem is in the fact that he always comes across as weak. I don't buy that this is the strongest metahuman ever. He really feels like a mid-tier superhero at best. This isn't Superman, but stronger than average man, I guess, which I just don't find compelling for Superman. In fact, Superman feels like more of a side character in his own movie. Mr. Terrific steals the show as the most competent and interesting character. In fact, it's worth noting that I think most of the actors did a good job with the material they had. The problem is just that the material isn't great, or that some are miscast. Nicholas Hoult is fine as a small and scrawny Lex Luthor, but my problem is that Lex Luthor shouldn't be small and scrawny. Lex Luthor should be an imposing figure. He's the kind of person who should be able to stand up to Superman and look him dead in the eye and say anything he wants to him. He needs screen presence that Holt's Luthor just doesn't have. Lex too should be more reserved than he ends up being in this movie. You get a scene early on where a bunch of robots are being torn apart around him, and he doesn't even flinch as pieces of them are thrown around, barely missing him, but later on in the film something goes wrong, and he starts freaking out and having a tantrum, kinda like Kylo Ren from The Force Awakens, though not quite as bad. He angrily throws a mug full of pens on the floor, then immediately demands his lackeys pick them up. He locks up ex-girlfriends in a secret jail in his pocket dimension. Again, this doesn't make him seem like an intimidating villain or a mastermind, it makes him look pathetic. While nowhere near as bad as Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor, I'm still not a fan of this version of him, and I just have no interest in seeing more of this Lex. Speaking of the pocket dimension though, that's arguably one of the worst parts of the movie. Lex Luthor just has this insane technology because he does. This is the kind of thing that's so insane in terms of advanced technology, that it should only appear very late in the DCU, but here we've got it in the first entry. How do you top this? Why couldn't we have started more restrained than this? Part of the problem with this movie is the fact that this doesn't feel like the first entry. It feels like a movie that should be in the DCU equivalent of Marvel's Phase 2 or 3. They say in the movie that Lex Luthor recreated the Big Bang in order to create this pocket dimension. This is said so casually that you'd think this is an average Tuesday for them. There is no humble beginning. It doesn't feel like there's any real build-up. Even the movie itself feels like we start at the second act, that there's an additional 40 minutes to an hour that's just missing from the beginning, and the rest of the movie has to provide exposition for. I wouldn't even have a problem with some of this if there were at least some decent world building to support certain things the film is trying to do better than what we got. Instead, it feels like you're just dumped into the middle of an ongoing story, largely because you are. Speaking of exposition, it's real bad in this film. A lot of it is characters just saying things out loud to inform the audience of certain things. For example, right at the start after Superman has been beaten and he arrives at the Fortress of Solitude, his robots play the message his Kryptonian parents sent to Earth with him. One of the robots then goes on to extensively explain that they do this because the message soothes him, and that the message was damaged upon his arrival and the second half of it can't be recovered. Problem being that this is essentially said for no one. Superman knows of this, and the film has the robots say they don't have feelings. But they do have a new robot, and the implication is that he's explaining this for her. But that makes no sense because she's a fucking robot and this information should come pre-installed. Speaking of his parents, it's a major plot point that Lex Luthor gets a hold of this message and somehow repairs it to play the second half and uses it to damage Superman's reputation. How, you might ask? Because Jor-El essentially tells him that he should rule the Earth, impregnate as many women as he can, and destroy all who oppose him. I've seen other people liken this to the Viltrumites from Invincible, and honestly, I can see why. The film goes out of its way to tell us multiple times that this is real and not forged or faked by Lex. Hell, seconds after it's played for the world, Mr. Terrific just says that he knows the people who worked on it and that it's real. I think it's a disastrously awful decision to make Jor-El evil, and essentially ruin any potential this character has to be a guiding or inspirational voice to Superman. It'd be like if Uncle Ben told Spider-Man that with great power comes the ability to just do whatever you want because no one can stop you. I don't actually know if this is worse than what Man of Steel did with Jonathan Kent either, where in that film, Jonathan Kent said that maybe Superman should have let a bus full of kids drown, and just allows himself to get eaten by a tornado when Superman could have easily saved him. This film instead turns Jor-El into a discount General Zod, saying he should spread his seed far and wide, and should rule over the planet without mercy. There's also been a lot of cope online that the message was faked or whatever, despite the film itself repeatedly asserting that it was real, and James Gunn himself saying it was real. Sure, it might be retconned in future entries, but for now, this is what it is, and this fucking sucks. Speaking of the Kents though, they're not in the movie nearly as much as they should be. They're really little more than a cameo. Early in the film, they call Clark, and the scene feels like it does a little more than establish they exist. They also make them look like tech-illiterate boomers, and I get it, haha relatable, but I don't know, I feel they should be portrayed a bit more competent than this. Keep in mind, this short call is a significant portion of their screen time. Like, 40% maybe. They have a scene later when he goes home to heal up, and a quick conversation with Pa Kent, but otherwise they're barely in the movie. This isn't great on its own, but this is made worse by the fact that one of the big payoffs at the end of the film is the fact that Clark has replaced the recording of his Kryptonian parents at the Fortress of Solitude with recordings of his parents and himself as a kid growing up with them. It's a nice moment in isolation, but doesn't have much to support it because the Kents are barely in the film. Also, why is this not the starting point for him? These people raised him all his life and yet they feel like an afterthought. Earlier I talked about how Superman spent the whole movie getting his ass kicked and in a place of weakness. Another problem is that he just doesn't inspire hope. He comes across as really lame and not that special. In fact, he almost feels like a discount version of himself. It's like there's another superhero with the exact same power set as Superman, but not nearly as strong as him in any regard. The tone is all over the place, with cheap and lame jokes often undercutting serious moments, including character deaths. Lex Luthor is also portrayed to be a complete idiot multiple times, a significant example of which is when he's trying to get information out of Superman, and instead of torturing a person he knows to make Superman give up the info, Lex instead plays Russian roulette with him, and kills the prisoner on the second shot, and it's undercut by a joke comment about how that went faster than expected, and it seems to be played for laughs. This has to be one of the most idiotic ways to try and torture information out of someone. Superman's reaction isn't great either. He basically breaks down crying, when instead he should have a calm but seething rage. It's further hard to take this seriously when we were shown that just around the corner from this prison block is a giant wall full of monkeys on computers shitposting about Superman online. Out of everything I heard in the leaks, this was the thing I was most desperately hoping to not be true. But no, it's there, and it's stupid as fuck. There's also this awful plot point that Lex has been monitoring how Superman fights, and has come up with something like 1,200 different fighting moves to perfectly counter him that he's essentially programmed into Ultraman, but the way of giving commands for him is to yell out attack codes, like A12, to which his lackeys then input in computers, and I guess send the code to Ultraman. This is insane video gaming nonsense that just doesn't make any sense. By the time you say an attack code like D27, Superman will have already made several attacks. Input lag is a very bad thing in video games, but it would be even worse in real life. There's no way to shout a code and manually input it in a computer faster than Superman can move. Honestly, I could go on, but I'm just sick of this movie, and more than anything, I'm just really disappointed. I really wanted to like this movie, and the more I think about it, the worse it gets. I give this movie a 3 out of 10. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please subscribe and check out my other videos.